Welcome to the first part of 3 series tutorial for making my Instagram app for web, Android and iOS. This first part consists of creating a simple web application which takes user input for searching images based on a particular tag. We will be using Instagram API to communicate with the Instagram backend and get JSON data. APIs are nothing but a way for developers to access data from any organization only if they make it available for you. You might ask, why would they make their data available to others? One word: advertising. They want other developers to use their API and make some really good applications so more people can be utilizing their service. JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation, is nothing but raw data without any styles or any information inside it. We will see how that looks like when we use it. We will take this JSON data that we just downloaded and then display it in a really simple interface that I have built. Let's see how the final output looks like. So here is our final finished product. I know it's nothing too fancy, but that's the goal. We have a simple header label here, a search image and a text field for a user to enter a tag and search button. Users can enter some text, let's say search for JavaScript and click submit button. It will search for images on Instagram and pull me 20 images. If you notice, as and when I scroll down, it pulls down more 20 images and appends to the web page. Let's search for something else. Let's try HTML. We see new images and finally CSS. There you go. That's what we want to build in this particular series. Before we begin working on the actual applications, first let's go and get the Instagram API client ID. So first what you have to do is go to instagram.com/developer website, just like here. Click on the top right login button. If you don't have an account, create an account. If it remembers you, it will show you a page similar to this. Let me click on the login button. Once logged in, click on the Manage Clients button on the top. In this page, as you can see, I have already created a client. You can click on the Register a New Client button. Let's fill out this form and click on the Register button. You will have your own client ID. Here you see the client ID on the top. We will be using this client ID throughout our course, so keep this handy. Welcome again and let the coding begin. Welcome back. Let's start with creating a folder for our project. I will be using Sublime Text as an IDE. Now IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, one which you can use for writing your code. Sublime Text is very popular and widely used by web developers, but there are also a lot more IDEs available out there, including Brackets, Dreamweaver, just to name a couple of them. I will be creating a new folder and call it HTML and open it in Sublime Text. Let me also create a couple of more folders inside and call it JS for JavaScript and CSS for style sheets. And CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And these folders is where I will save my JavaScripts and style sheets respectively. Next, let's create three basic files: index.html for HTML code, styles.css for styles, and scripts.js for scripts. So now that everything is ready, let's get rolling with code in the next video. So now that you have all the files ready, let's start with the HTML file. If you see on the top, I'm adding exclamation doc type inside less than and greater than sign. The doc type declaration must be the very first thing in your HTML document before HTML tag, which follows after this. The doc type declaration is not an HTML tag. It is an instruction to the web browser about what version of HTML the web page is written in. In HTML5, all we have to do is to tell the browser that doc type is HTML and hence doc type HTML. Next, we have the HTML tag where we specify that the language used in this HTML page is English. This is meant to assist search engines and browsers. Also make sure to close the HTML tag. The slash HTML tag indicates the end of HTML page. The next section that I would like to add is head section. The head element is a container for all the head elements which include a title for the document, scripts, styles, meta information and more. Metadata is data or information about data. The meta tag provides metadata about HTML document. Metadata will not be displayed on the page, but will be machine parsable. Meta elements are typically used to specify page description, keywords, author of the document, last modified, and other metadata. The metadata can be used by browsers to display content or reload page, by search engines for keywords, or other web services. Meta tags always go inside the head element. The character set attribute specifies the character set encoding for the HTML document. Common values include UTF-8, which is character encoding for Unicode. In theory, any character encoding can be used, but no browser understands all of them. The more widely a character encoding is used, the better the chance that a browser will understand it. The HTTP equi attribute provides an HTTP header for the information or value of the content attribute. The HTTP equi attribute can be used to simulate an HTTP response header. The XUA compatible meta tags allows web authors to choose what version of Internet Explorer the page should be rendered in. Edge mode tells Internet Explorer to display content in the highest mode available. Next, let's add the viewport information. The viewport is the user's visible area of a web page. The viewport varies with the device and will be smaller on a mobile phone than on a computer screen. The meta viewport element gives the browser instructions on how to control the page's dimension and scaling. The width equal to device width part sets the width of the page to follow the screen width of the device, which will vary depending on the device. The initial scale equal to 1.2 part sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded by the browser. Lastly, we have the title tag. The title tag is required in all HTML documents and it defines the title of the document. The title element defines a title in the browser toolbar and provides a title for page when it is adds to favorites. It is also used as a title for the page in search engine results. In the next video, we will be adding Bootstrap and jQuery in our code. Bootstrap is the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework for developing responsive, mobile first websites. We will be using Bootstrap in our code to add some of the styles and features provided. jQuery is a JavaScript library and it greatly simplifies JavaScript programming. We will be using jQuery to write some simplified JavaScript, so Our scripts are small and readable. So let's start with adding Bootstrap CSS from CDN or Content Delivery Network. A content delivery network is a system of distributed servers that delivers web pages and other web content to a user based on the geographic location of the user, the origin of the web page, and a content delivery server. We use this just so that we don't have to host it on our servers, and these servers are fairly faster than my server, for example. The link tag defines a link between a document and an external resource and is mostly used to link to external style sheets. REL stands for relationship between current document and the linked document, which in this case is style sheet. And next, href is the URL to the CDN where Bootstrap CSS is hosted. Next, let's add the body tag. The body tag defines the document's body. The body element contains all the contents of an HTML document such as text, hyperlinks, images, tables, lists, and others. We will be adding our scripts right before the body tag closes because that's the last thing we want the page to load. The reason being, we want to give importance to the actual body content before we load the scripts. The script tag. This tag is used to define a client-side script, such as JavaScript. The script element either contains scripting statements or it points to an external script file through the src attribute or the source attribute. In our case, we are providing the source to jQuery CDN. The reason we are loading jQuery CDN is we will be using it in our scripts and also will be used by Bootstrap JavaScript, which we will be adding next. Here we go. Our Bootstrap JS is also now in place. Now we have to add the important elements for Bootstrap to work added to our web page. Let's also add our local scripts and style sheets. The script tag will include our JavaScript to the HTML page. Next, this will add our styles.css to the web page. This concludes our video of adding all the scripts and styles to our web page. Next, let's create some content to display. Let's start adding some content to our HTML page. Let's add a div tag with class container. The div tag defines a division of or a section in an HTML document. The div tag is used to group block elements to format them with CSS. And the class that we use is container. Container is custom CSS that is provided by Bootstrap. Let's open this web page in browser and see what we got till now. Perfect. We got an empty page. Let's add some text. Inside the div tag, I have added a h1 tag with the text my Instagram in it. The h1 tag is used to define HTML heading. Let's go back to the HTML page and refresh and we should see this displayed. Perfect. Next, inside the div tag, add an additional class to the layer. Let me call it box. Now, to define this, let's go to styles.css and for adding classes, we have to use dot name of the class format and all the style is provided inside the curly brackets. Let's start with giving a background color. I will provide the value as hex value hashtag CED8F6. This is three-part color where the first two characters represent the red flavor in hex and the second two characters represent the green flavor in hex and the last two characters represent the blue flavor in hex. Since blue is more prominent, the color will be a bluish blend. Next, let's provide a height of 100% to this class. And finally, let's align the text to center. Let's run the application and see what we have accomplished. Let's go back and add the form for our application. I will provide the class form inline so the entire form shows up in one line. This is again a Bootstrap class. Also, I will provide an ID to this form. IDs are unique identifiers for web page elements. There can't be two elements with the same ID. It's like social security number for people in United States. Next, let me add another div element with class form group provided by Bootstrap to group the form elements together. Next, let's add another div with class input group again provided by Bootstrap where we will embed our form elements. Next, let's add the search image. Now Bootstrap provides this to us using glyph icon and I want it to be an add-on to the text field. Now let's add the input tag which will create a text field for us. We can do this by providing the type text, specify class as form control provided by Bootstrap, and add a placeholder search term to display inside the text field. Finally, let's add the search button. Using the button tag and specify type as submit. It will make sure the form is submitted to the HTML page once user press this button. I will style it with class button primary provided by Bootstrap which will make this button look blue in color and pretty crisp. Let's refresh the browser and there you go. Looks very close to what I need. All I need to make this complete is add a container to display images. I will add a div tag with class container and give it an ID search images. This will let me embed images later once I download using JavaScript. Let's go to styles.css and add a padding to this div element we added. I have given padding of 20 pixels just to make it look clean. Let's refresh the browser and see what we have. Much better and clean interface. This concludes our video. We have a clean HTML page ready for us. All we need to do next is write some JavaScript. We got our website up with all the HTML and CSS and now let's add some magic, I mean JavaScript. In jQuery, to get a hold of an HTML ID element, we will have to use the $sign along with the pound sign or hash sign followed by the object ID. Since the ID is called search form for the form we created, we can access it using $hashtag search form. So what happens in the HTML when we press the search button is it tries to submit the form and calls the submit function in JavaScript, and that's what we are trying to implement. As soon as user clicks on the button, it will look for the submit function and find this JavaScript with submit function and execute the function provided. The function also has an argument e which is for event if we need to use it. Inside the function, as soon as it's called, I am disabling the default behavior of submitting the form and hence I call the prevent default method on the event. Next, I will make sure that the search images object has empty HTML inside it. If you remember, search images is where all the images are displayed. This will also make sure the next time user searches for something, if there were images from previous search, they are kind of cleaned off. So the .html function in jQuery is used to add HTML inside a particular element. In this case, we are setting it to empty. Now we need to get the text user inserted inside a text field. To do that, I will access the ID for the text field, which is search term, and get the value inside it. I have also assigned this value to a variable search term. Next, let's get the URL for the Instagram API, which provides us the raw data aka JSON we need. You can just go to developer section on their website and get this link. I have already created my account and fetched the URL. The URL is http api.instagram.com/version1 v1/tags/search term that I want /media /recent /client ID equal to your client ID that you generated in the previous video. Here I can add the item I need to search for, where is the search time a variable, which is the search time variable. Let's look at this URL on a browser. I have loaded the URL here. You can see that the data is provided as pure text and in more of a key value pairs. The thing I'm interested here is the data object, and inside that we have images, where we have three types of images: low res, thumbnail and standard resolution. We can pick which one we want and download once we download the JSON file. Let's go back and add some code. So last thing we did was adding the URL. I would like you to create your own account and enter your client ID as I have specified here, which you probably created in the previous video. Once I'm done with this, I will call the display images for URL and pass the URL string to this function. This function will download the JSON and display the images. Of course, it's not that easy. We will have to implement this function. So I have a blank function now. I will use the .get method provided by jQuery to download the JSON. Let's see how that works. First, provide the jQuery symbol dollar and then call the .get method on it. You will have to pass the argument of the URL string, and then it will fetch and call the callback function along with the data parameter, which has the entire JSON string. Once I have the data, I will get whatever HTML is inside search images ID and then run a loop over the data. Here I created a variable I and assigned it to 0, and want to run this loop for as many data elements we have inside JSON using the length property. And for each loop, the variable I will be incremented by 1. So inside, I created an image tag with source from the data element at a particular index depending on which object I am parsing, and then get the images thumbnail URL. Also, I have provided a class of image thumbnail, which is Bootstrap, and then provided my own custom class image, which I will define in a little while. Once I am done going through each and every element from JSON, I will display the HTML in the search images element ID. Also, I forgot to add the closing brackets on line 9 and 19. If you forget this, you will get JavaScript error. Also, inside my HTML5, I had mentioned script.js. Let's change that to match my scripts.js file. Let me run the code, and this is what we will see. I see images but not pretty display. That means go back and add the image CSS class we have added, and I will just define a margin of 20 pixel. That's all. Let's confirm we have the image class added to the image tag. Let's refresh and see. There you go. Now it looks presentable. Next video, we will talk about infinite scrolling to display images as and when user scrolls down the page. Infinite scrolling. We left off with basic downloading working. Let's see how we can add infinite scrolling to our web page. First, let me create a variable called as next URL and set it blank. I will be accessing it to fetch the next URL I would like to download JSON from. To keep track of scrolling on our web page, we will have to add a function .scroll on the window. To attain that, all we have to do is to get the window object by $window and then add the scroll function on it. Whenever user scrolls, this function will be called. So next, I will check if the scroll top of the window is greater than or equal to height of the document minus window height minus 10 for just a small padding. If scroll top is greater, it will try to fetch more images for us. Since we have a method to download images already ready, let's call that with next URL, which is blank for now. To get this next URL, what I will be doing is getting the next URL from the data objects pagination variable, which has the next URL link. I have assigned that on line number 22. Also, I will change the URL string to next URL when I download it first time, so same method can be called. I have done these changes on line 17 and 18. Now the only issue I see is what if user is scrolling while the download is going on. Not everyone has fast internet and sometimes downloading takes time. So I need to disable multiple downloading. Let's add a variable downloading and set it to false. We will download data only when this is true, otherwise just ignore the scroll. That's the reason I have set the variable downloading on line 23 to true. And then on line 32, let's set the variable to false, since by then we have downloaded the JSON and also displayed the data on the HTML page. Let's go back to the scroll function. And on line 7, let's check if downloading is true or false. Only if it's not downloading, I will call the display images for URL function. That should be it. Let's go to our web page and see if it works. Perfect. There you go. As and when I scroll it, it loads more images and appends it to the bottom. This concludes our first part of creating a web application that downloads images from Instagram and also provide infinite scrolling. I will see you in the next sections where we will be working on Android and iOS apps to do the same. Welcome to the second part of a 3 series tutorial for making my Instagram app for web, Android and iOS. This second part consists of creating a simple Android application which takes user input for searching images based on a particular tag and fetching images from Instagram and displaying them in a grid format. This will be very similar to our first part, but we will be using the Android environment. So here is our final finished product. Just like the web, it's not too fancy but works perfectly. As you can see from the interface, it's fairly a simple app where we have a text field and a button. When I type something inside the text field, let's say development, and here we see a bunch of images based on our input. Also, let's scroll down and you will see we have an infinite scroll implemented. It will keep on fetching more images as and when we scroll down. This is what we would want to achieve from the next series of videos. Make sure you have Android Studio and Genymotion installed on your computer. You can just Google for Android Studio download and find a link for the IDE. Next, go to genymotion.com and install the emulator by following the steps on the downloads page. Some people also prefer other IDEs and emulators for writing code and running their apps respectively. But for this particular series of tutorials, we will be just using Android Studio and Genymotion. I would recommend you to keep them ready and also play around with them just to see what all features they provide. Some of the cool features provided by Genymotion is use of camera where they have a simulated camera as well as your laptop camera. There is also a setting for GPS. You can set your location anywhere in the world, just do the sum of simulations with location. But we will not be using either of these. But I would still recommend you to go ahead and play with them for the time being and get yourself familiar with the environment. Once you have done both of them ready to run, once you have got both of them ready to run, move on to the next video where I will be showing you how to write some code. In this video, we will be working on starting up our Android project and setting up a layout for our final product. Fire up both Android Studio and Genymotion that you downloaded in the previous video. Let's start with Android Studio. Click on Start a new Android Studio project. This will give you an option to configure your project. I have given the name My Instagram app for my project. You can specify whatever name you want to provide. Also, you can change it later if you want to. Next, enter your company domain. If you don't have one, you can just give some unique name which no one else might have. Maybe your first name dot last name. What Android Studio does is it takes all the information above and helps you create a package name. So my package name is com.webinarana.myinstagramApp. This has to be unique on the App Store. No one else can have this name. If you upload your app with the same name, Play Store will reject your application while uploading or even creating the app profile. You can leave the project location to where it is, or you can provide a location or navigate using the button on the extreme right. Let's click next. This screen is called Form Factors, or what SDK you want to use. Since I'm creating a phone and a tablet app, I will use that, and for minimum SDK, I will select API 14, which is ice cream sandwich. So this app can be installed on any devices running Android 4.0 and above. Next, Android Studio provides a bunch of templates for you to pick from. I will not use any complex template as I'm going to build everything from scratch, and my UI anyway is pretty simple. I will pick an empty activity. Activity here is a screen or a page. It's an UI element with which user can interact with. Think of activity as our first screen. Next is naming the screen or activity. I will leave the default option here. The main activity file is a Java file where you can write all the logic, and the layout file activity main is a drag and drop editor where you can add elements and design your screen. It's completely in XML. Let's click finish and get to some hands-on coding. It will take around 2 to 5 seconds to set up the project using the specifications you have provided, and you will see this screen with a file navigation on the left and two files open in the main editor section. We see our main activity.java file and activity main.xml file already open. There is a folder on the left called as manifest, which contains android manifest.xml file, which is the main file for our project. This particular file registers your application with Android OS when an app is installed or even before it's installed. You can see here it has an application tag which has activity embedded in it, telling the operating system that this application has only one activity or screen at the moment. Every time you create a new activity on or screen, you will have to register them with this file. Since we will be using internet in this application to download images from Instagram, let's ask you permission from the user. So right above application tag, let's add the tag users permission and provide the name android.permission.internet. This will make sure we can access internet once the app is installed on user's device. Next, let's go back to main activity.java file. You will see here we already have a function called as onCreate function added for us. This is called as soon as the activity is created by the application. So when user clicks on the app icon, it will check with manifest to check which is the first activity, and that time will open main activity Java and call onCreate immediately. And inside onCreate, you will see it calls a function set content view, and you see it's passing the argument r.layout.activity underscore main. What it's saying here is we need to access the resources where we will find a layout folder which contains activity underscore main XML file. The set content view will access the XML file and follow a process called as inflating, which means converting XML to Java. So it will convert our XML code into Java automatically and inject the code here. So let's go to activity main and see what exactly it finds. You see something called as relative layout. Inside relative layout, all elements are placed relative to each other or to their parent. You can see the graphical interface by clicking on the tab at the bottom which says design, and you see a drag and drop interface. You can drag drop any elements from the palette here and drop it onto our screen, and it will be changed to XML in the text file. Let's run the project as it is by clicking the play button on the top, the green play button. Once it compiles the code, it will ask you whether do you want to run the code. Where do you want to run the code? Either one of the running devices or emulator that provided by Android Studio. I have selected Genymotion and will click OK. And there you go. Very simple app installed on Genymotion and opens up our main activity. Let's close this right screen with properties. I don't need it, and let's go to the text version. I don't need to see the hello world text view, so let's remove that. And also I'm going to add linear layout instead of relative layout. A linear layout can be two types, horizontal or vertical. Horizontal is by default, which means items will be placed next to each other in a horizontal manner, and in vertical orientation they are placed one below another. Also will remove all the padding attributes added automatically. Next, I'm going to add another linear layout inside, which will be horizontal. I'm doing this so I can add the text field and button next to each other. Let's add the text field, aka edit text, with a width of 0 dp and give a weight of 1, which means don't calculate the width, just use whatever is available to you. And here dp stands for device independent pixels. We don't use pixels because Android automatically will convert this to pixels depending on pixel density of a particular device. The button I have added, I have given a text of search. Next, let's add the main feature, the grid view, where all the images will be drawn in a grid format. I have given an ID of grid view, column width of 100 dp for each image, and vertical spacing of 10 dp. Let's run this and see what we have. Perfect. As you can see on the right at Genymotion, looks like our basic layout is ready. If I enter something and click search, nothing will happen. So I feel we have completed enough for this video. In the next video, let's bring some things to life. Let's get some functionality rolling in this video. We already created the initial layout. Let's put our button to work. So to add a click event on button, all you have to do is provide an on-click attribute on the button. As you can see, I have given a value of search Instagram when on-click is fired. Next, I can press Alt return key and it will ask me if I want to create this function in main activity. Just press return. And there you go. You will see the function automatically created for you. Now only if they could have added all the code for us. So time to write some logic. First, get your Instagram client ID from the Instagram website which we have created in the initial videos. I have provided it as a static final string object on the top. You can add your client ID here. Next, I will create an array list to hold all the images inside it. I will download the images and convert them into bitmap and store it inside this array list. It's not a great solution, but for now it works. I will create an object for grid view, call it grid view. Also an object for edit text and call it search text. Next, to link both of these grid views and edit text to their elements in the layout file, you will have to call the function findViewById and provide them the IDs of those elements. Inside my search Instagram function, first I will clear the bitmap array. Since if the user clicks on the button again and again, I will have to clear the previous results. Let's put the URL together. Here I have created the download URL and provided the URL for API. Also, in second line, I am trying to access the text user entered in edit text search text by calling getText method. I will have to convert that into string since it's of the type edit text string. Now I can download the images in this function as this function runs on main application thread. Anything that might take time or any network operation should always be done in a separate thread, not on the main thread. Now Android provides a way to do this in an easy manner using a class called as async task. So let's create that and call it download images class. Here you see download images extends async task. Also it needs three parameters, but not the actual parameters, only the type. Since I am providing a string URL to this class. I will tell this class that the first parameter is of the type string, which is the input. Second parameter is for progress, and I will just say void since I will not be using it. The final item is the result, which also I have set to void since I will be saving the data inside my array list. There is an error, so I have to implement some methods. The only method we need to implement is do in background. This function runs in the background thread. It takes the string input from whoever is calling this class. Inside this function, let's take the input. If you see the arguments say dot dot dot, so that means the input is a list of items. And since I will be passing the URL only, let's get the first parameter and assign it to the URL string. Let's convert this string to URL since we will have to download data from a URL. This URL will ask us to add a try catch block around it for a malformed URL exception, which might occur if there's an error in the URL creation or typos. Next, I will create a connection to this URL, which will provide me the input stream and pass it to a buffered reader all in one step. So basically, what it does is connects to the URL, and once the connection is made, it will create a bridge, which is the input stream, and pass the data back to my application, which I will read into a buffered reader. I will have to add a few more exceptions, which is unsupported encoding and IO exception. What if there was no connection or the encoding that I have specified, which is UTF-8, is not right? But most of the web pages or web APIs use UTF-8. If it's not UTF-8, you would want to read the documentation for that API or email someone. From the reader, I will read the entire line of string of JSON and pass it to JSON string I created here. Now, to convert this huge string into something my Java code will understand, I will pass the string using JSON object class. I will create a JSON object for the entire string. Need another catch clause here for JSON exception. What if the JSON is not properly formatted? That's what this is for. So if you see in in this JSON that we receive, we need to access the data element, which is an array of items, and from each item we need to images object which has thumbnail and then URL inside it, where we can find the URL for the actual image. So let's get the array using JSON array class and specify the object data where it belongs. Next, we can loop through the entire array and process one image at a time. So first, let's get the object I'm accessing, then get the images object from it, then the thumbnail, and finally we have the URL for the images using getString method. Once we have the string URL, let's convert it into URL class, create it a HTTP URL connection and connect it to the URL. Get the input stream and finally get the bitmap object from this input stream. Now that we have our bitmap object, let's push this into our array list bitmap array using the add method. Now that we have our bitmaps all in an array list, we have to provide it to a grid view. This can be done using an adapter. An adapter is something that you can set for a grid view and it automatically draws us the view. I mean, not automatically, you'll have to provide the structure. So let's create an adapter and make it belong to image adapter class. Let's create this class and make it extend base adapter. Base adapter is one of the built-in adapters provided by Android. We will customize our adapter based on base adapter. Now, have to add some methods. There are 4 methods we are interested in. Let's implement them. There we go. Inside this, I might need access to the context, which I can set to the current activity or pass it when I initialize the image adapter. So let's create a local variable of that and call it mContext. Let's create a constructor and make sure we pass the context and assign it to the local instance. The get context method needs to know how many elements we have. The get count method, which here needs to know how many elements we have. This is same as bitmap array, so we'll just say bitmap array dot size. Rest we can leave as it is, but let's go to the get view method. This method needs a view back, which means this is where we specify how each and every item in grid view looks like. If you see carefully, it has a position where it says which item it's drawing. Next is convert view, where when user scrolls up and down, the previous views are deleted and can be reused. So it's passed back to this function to check if you want to reuse them and save memory. And the last one is parent, where this adapter is used. Since I will be having images, let me create an image view and pass it back by using the return statement. So let's add some code. First, I'm checking here if the convert view exists, so I can reuse. If there is no convert view, that means it's the first time I'm creating objects or there is nothing available. So let's create the image view and set the layout parameters to be 200 pixels for width and height, or DP. Also, I have set the image to scale based on the size if it's bigger by saying center crop. If the convert view is available, I just pass the convert view back. At the end, I have specified what image to use by picking it from the bitmap array using the position argument. Okay, now let's put this adapter to work. First, in onCreate method, let me initialize this adapter. It needs a context, so we'll pass an instance of main activity. Next, let's set grid views adapter to this adapter. Finally, let's call the download images async class to put everything in place. I have created an instance here, and to start the download you will have to call execute method by passing the URL we have. Also, let's set the grid view selection to index 0 so it scrolls all the way to the top when user searches for something new. Since we have added the adapter in onCreate method, we will have to notify this adapter that it's got data once download is done. This can be done in on post execute of async task. So let's add this method and notify the adapter along with invalidating all the previous views. This will clean up everything and will draw the new images. Let's run this application and search for Java, and there you go. Perfect. We can see all the images returned back. So here we got all the functionality working. In the next video, let's make sure our infinite scroll also works. We will constantly download images as and when user scrolls down the grid view. Welcome back to the final video of this series. Everything is working perfectly, and now all we have to do is add the infinite scroll feature to our application. To do this, first let's create a boolean object downloading which will let us know if a download is in progress or not. This will help us not to download same items again and again. I will also create a next URL string which will keep track of what to download next based on pagination URL provided by the JSON data. Inside onCreate, I will initialize downloading to false since there is nothing going on right now. Also, let's change our download URL to next URL and make sure async task is provided by this object. Inside async task, we also have a on pre-execute method similar to on post execute, and you probably already guessed this is called before run in background method and is also used to set up the task. I will set downloading to true here since the downloading is going to take place, and in the inverse method on post execute, let's set downloading to false. While downloading, let's also get the next URL from the pagination object provided by JSON, which has the next URL. Now we have to make sure we add the event for grid views scrolling and check if it reached the bottom. We can do that using set on scroll listener, We can provide an anonymous class instead, which has two methods on scroll state changed, which we don't need, and the other on scroll, which has four parameters, out of which three are of interest to us: first visible item count, and total item count. First, we can check if it's downloading. If it's not downloading, let's check the scroll. If the first visible item plus visible item count is greater or equal to total item count, means start downloading new images. That means we are at the bottom of the page. I have to set downloading to true here and call the async task. That's all. Let's run the application and see if it actually works. Searching for Java, and here are our first results, and as and when I scroll I see more results displayed. Play around with this application and see what more you can do if you want to do something more than this. This concludes our second part of creating an Android application that downloads images from Instagram and also provides infinite scrolling. I will see you in the next section where we will be working on iOS app to do the same that we did here. Welcome to the third and the final part of a 3 series tutorial for making my Instagram app for web, Android and iOS. This final part consists of creating a simple iOS application which takes user input from searching images based on a particular tag and fetching images from Instagram and displaying them in a collection format. This will be very similar to our first and the second part, but we will be using the iOS environment. So here is our final finished product. Just like web and Android, it's not too fancy but works perfectly. As you can see from the interface, it's a fairly simple app where we have a text field and a button. When I type something inside the text field, let's say development, and we see a bunch of images based on our input. Also, let's scroll down and you will see we have an infinite scroll implemented. It will keep on fetching more images as and when we scroll down. This is what we would want to achieve from the next series of videos. For this particular tutorial, you will need a Mac. You will have to install Xcode on your computer. You can get that from the Mac App Store. Along with Xcode, you also have to get some simulators for iPhone and iPad. You also get access to simulators for watch and TV, but we will not focus on those as this is strictly for iPhone and iPod apps. The simulator has bunch of apps installed already, so you can play around with it and make sure you get around all the options. Play around with the settings and other apps available and make yourself comfortable before starting out the project. Xcode and the simulators also have a lot of shortcuts in Mac, so make sure you pick them up from the menu bar. It will help you a lot in the long run. Once you are ready, move on to the next video where I will be showing you how to create layouts and write some code for Apple app. In this video, we will be working on starting up our iOS project and setting up a layout for our final product. Fire up Xcode and click on create a new Xcode project. In this screen, you will see a bunch of templates available where you can start from. You can create bunch of projects and see what they all do, but for this project, let me focus on iOS application and focus on single view application in particular. A single view application is nothing but an application with a single view or say a single page. Same as activity which we did in Android. Next, let's give this project a name. I will call this app My Instagram app. Organization name, you can give your company name, or if you don't have one, just give your name. Next, we have organization identifier or something we call reverse domain name. I have my website vivinarana.com, so reverse of that is com.vivinarana. You can just give any name, like you can just say your first name dot last name and it will take it. We provide all this information just to create a bundle identifier, which should be unique for every app in App Store. So if you see here, Xcode takes these details you entered and will create a unique identifier com.vivinana.my-instagram-app. Since we will be working in Objective-C, let's leave that as it is, and we will be focusing only on iPhone. You can select iPad or universal, where universal means for both iPhone and iPad. For now, we'll just keep iPhone. Make sure the next three checkboxes are unchecked. These are used for some advanced topics which we do not cover in this particular course. So press next. Here you have to specify where you want to save the project. I would like to save mine in the apps folder that I've created in my documents folder. Press create and we are all done. This is the first screen you will see when you complete the steps. By default, it shows you the information for the project. Xcode has placed top buttons to run your app and also has a device selected on the top where it will run the project. For me, it says iPhone 6s Plus. You can change that to anything that you want. You can try to run this app as it is and it will still run but show you a white blank screen. On the top right, we also have some buttons to set up the IDE to your preference. Play around with these and see what you would prefer. Open the simulator. If it's not open, you can press the play button and open it. Let's make sure they are next to each other so we can see how our output looks as and when we play around with Xcode. Now let's look in more detail. You can see on top we have all details of the project in identity, also some deployment information, what device, what orientation and things. So let's open up the supporting files group on the left and you will find a file called as main.m. This is the first file that is executed when your project runs. All you need to know here is that it calls something called as UI application main function and passes the class app delegate to it. This does a bunch of things. It will try to get the layout from the previous info screen we say where it knows that it has to pick up main storyboard from the application to draw the layout of the app, which we will look at shortly. But let's go to app delegate. App delegate has .h and .m files. .h is the header file where all the variables and functions are defined, even the name of the class and basic class structure. .m is the implementation file where the actual code is implemented. So if you see this screen again, in the middle it specifies main interface to be a file called main. To be specific, it's main.storyboard. Let's go to main storyboard file and see what it has. Let's hide the utilities pane by clicking on the top right button. This will let us see the screen more clearly. If you see here, we have a screen which represents the first view for the app. It is square and doesn't look like an iPhone screen. The reason being it's using something called as size classes, which we will not be covering in this tutorial. So let's disable it. You can open utilities pane again and in it go to the first tab. In the middle you will see use size classes checkbox checked. Let's uncheck that. You will see an alert message confirming and asking what you want the target to be. Let's select iPhone and press disable button. Also on the top right of utilities you can change the size from inferred to iPhone 5.5 inch, so it will display you how the app will look in iPhone 6s Plus. There you go. Now we have a screen that looks like an iPhone Plus screen. Now let's hide the navigation pane and see how main storyboard looks like. If you see, there's an arrow coming from somewhere pointing at our screen. It's telling the storyboard that this is the first screen or the initial screen. If you open the utilities pane and click on properties in the center tab, you will see the checkbox checked which says is the initial view controller. Let's add a bar on the top. We can do this by embedding this particular view controller in a navigation controller. Just select editor, embed in navigation controller, and there you go. Our main first view is now embedded in a navigation controller, and it will have a navigation bar on the top. Double click on the navigation bar and add a title, My Instagram App. On the right side, go to the bottom Object Library tab where you can find different elements which you can just drag and drop into your screen. Let's drop a text field and a button and place them as shown here. Storyboard will provide you with guides which will help you lay out these different items in an orderly manner. Select the text field and you will see properties of it on the right pane. Change the placeholder to enter search term. Also at the bottom, let's search for collection, and now you will see a collection view which we can use to draw collection of images. Drag and drop that just below your text field and button and make sure it fits on the screen. Click on the size inspector on the top in the right pane while having the collection view selected, and change the cell size to be 125 by 125. Also section insets to 5 by 5. These are just these insets are just to provide some margin and draw the images inside the cells. If you want to support this application to run on all the devices, go to the bottom and select reset to suggest constraints, something that I'm doing here. It will add constraints that will make your layout flexible to look similar on different screen sizes. Maybe it's iPhone 4, iPhone 5 or iPhone 6. Okay, that's all for the right pane. Close it and let's run the application. You will see a black screen where you added collection view. Since we have not given a background color to this collection view, by default if it doesn't have anything, it will show black background screen. Let's add a background color of white as default and then run it again, and there you go, we have our application layout running. So great, um, so great on following along and creating your layout for iPhone. That's all for this video. Follow along and next video to write some code and make some magic happen. We have successfully created a nice layout for our app, a very simple one. Now let's dive in and write some code. I'm going to select the assistant editor from the top and close the navigation pane. So now I have my view controller and the code file next to each other. So we can let the code file what we all added. You can specify that you have an outlet on your storyboard by just clicking on text field with control and drag this just on line number and just leave it on line 12. It will show this pop-up. Give a name on to your text field. I will call it search field, and you will see a property being created for this text field. Now the view controller code file knows that there is an outlet in the storyboard. Let's do the same for the collection view and call it collection view. So we have another property. Let's create an array of the type mutable array, or to be specific, ns mutable array, and call it array of images. In Objective C, we create objects and this is the pointer. So this array of images is a pointer to our array. It's mutable because we will keep on adding images as and when we fetch from Instagram API. If you create a simple array, you can modify it once created. You can't modify once you create it. This is also added inside the interface declaration because I want it to be private to this class only. Let's control drag on the button and leave it on line 23. This is creating an IB action. An action is an event that is triggered by the user. So every time user clicks on this button, it will call this function. Let me give it a name, search images, and it will be triggered when user touches this button and removes his finger off the button, hence touch up inside event. So now we have our function. There is one argument passed along with it called a sender, which is the actual button object. We will not be doing anything with memory warning, so let's get rid of this code. Also get rid of the comments in view did load, and then let's define the array of images here. We are allocating the ns mutable array here, which will create the object in memory and initialize it with init function. This is how you write nested methods in Objective-C. Let's focus completely on code. So let's get rid of the storyboard file and make sure all we see is code. I will define my client ID for Instagram API here on top by using the pound sign define or pound define and call it client ID. And you can add your client ID inside the quotes. In Objective-C, all string objects are added inside quotes prefixed by @sign. Let's go to search images function and create a string with the entire URL to Instagram API. You can format a string by calling a method on NSString. This method is called string with format and pass the format. If you notice carefully, the string has two percentage at the rate, which will be replaced by the string from the text field and the client ID we created. Next, let's make sure every time user clicks on the button, the array is empty. So we'll remove all the objects if they exist. Now finally, it's time to call the URL and fetch images. We can't do all this on the main thread. We have been working on the main thread all this while, and main thread is also called as UI thread, which interacts with the UI. Since we are going to do a network operation, let's move this on the background thread so user doesn't notice the delay. We can do this by calling the perform selector in background method and pass the method as a selector and also passing the argument object, which is our URL. So let's implement this method download images, which takes in the URL as an argument. The best and easiest way right now to fetch the JSON is using data with contents of URL, which is a method that belongs to NS data class. This is nothing but bytes of data downloaded from internet in Objective-C byte format. Once we have this data, we can convert this into a key value pair object, also called as NS dictionary. NS dictionary has key value pairs and it looks like JSON pretty much. Here we can convert the entire JSON NS data we received in NS dictionary by calling the NS JSON serialization class method with JSON data and pass it the data. Let's go to JSON and see what we are looking for. We are interested in the images which exist inside data object in JSON. So let's add the objects from that array which exists in the key data into our array of images array. Once we are done with this, we can just reload the collection view. But since this current function runs on background thread and collection view is on the main UI, let's make sure it reloads itself on the main thread. Perfect. In Objective-C, if you want to communicate between two classes, you need delegates, or sometimes called as protocols. What it means is there can be communication between two classes using these functions. Now UI collection view calls some protocol methods whenever something happens, and these we need to implement in our view controller. So in short, collection view is making our view controller do some stuff based on its structure. There are two such delegate or protocols that collection view has. One is called delegate and the other one is called data source property. Let's make sure that the required methods will be implemented in our current class. The second step is our class has to follow these delegates, so we will have to make sure it knows about them. So on top near the interface declaration, let's specify these protocols inside angular brackets UI collection view delegate and UI collection view data source. When we go to the definition inside UI collection view class, you will notice there are two required methods. Let's implement these two. These two, the rest you can implement as and you need, or if your requirement needs them. We don't need them for our project right now. The first one is called collection view number of items in section. For this, we can just return the number of items we have inside the array of images. For the second one, we would have to return a UI collection view cell. Now I don't want to use the default one, which is UI collection view cell. I want to create my own custom collection view cell. Let's create a new file. There are a bunch of different types of files available here, but For this, we need Coco Touch class. We can name it collection view cell and make sure it subclasses from UI collection view cell and press next and save it in the same directory by pressing create button. You will see both h and m file .h and .m file have been created. Let's make sure this class is imported in our view controller so it knows about the class. Let's create an instance of collection view cell by calling the dequeue reusable cell with identifier method and give the identifier as cell. What this does is over time, every time you scroll up and down the collection view, it will remove the cell which went out of view and dequeue it to be reused by the collection view to create a new cell. So it's same as Android, it will kind of reuse the cells as and when the user scrolls up and down without using much memory. Let's make sure we rename the collection view cell in storyboard to belong to class that we recently created, and then we can specify a new um, identifier, also the identifier as cell here too. Let me give a background color of light gray color to this cell. Now we get the imagery where we will have to go through the array and get, so the image array we will go get through the object at a specific index and then get the object located at images thumbnail URL. We can then pass this URL to the custom cell and call a method drawImage. This function doesn't exist yet, so it might give you an error. Let's head on to collection view cell class. Here, now I have defined the function which takes the argument, the image, which is the image URL. Let's implement this method inside the .m file. Let me create the extension where I can create some private objects. I will create a UI image view which will act as a container for my image. I can allocate this image view and then set the frame for its location. I will make sure it starts from the coordinate 0, 0 and has the same width and height as of the cell. I will also make sure that by default it has a default.jpg image displayed. Just in case if the image takes forever to download, let me drag and drop this image. It will ask me to copy the image and then you go over what we call is we got here default image. Again, I will call the function draw image in background to fetch the image in a background thread by calling perform selector in background. Finally, let's add the image view to the cell. The method that runs in the background, let's implement it. We will have to do the same thing, fetch the image using data with contents of URL, and once it's there, let's just send it to the main thread using the method draw on main. Inside the draw on main implementation, all we have to do is set the image view image property to the data we downloaded. Finally, let's go back to the view controller and make sure we return the cell that we just created. One last thing, to make sure everything runs properly is to mention that our application uses internet. This can be done at info.plist file. We will have to create an entry here called as app transport security settings, add a key value pair in it, allow arbitrary loads and set it to yes. That's all. Just make sure that you can load arbitrary websites to your application. Let's run the application, search for development, and there you go. We have images. Scroll down and you will not see anything more than 20 images. This concludes our video. Here we got everything working except one which is infinite scrolling. But we learned how to fetch images and data from internet and display it in a collection view. Let's move to the next video where you can learn how to do infinite scrolling in iOS. We have our entire application running without any issues, but we still have to complete one thing, infinite scrolling. Let's open view controller implementation. Here I will create an string object and call it next URL. So I know what to load when user scrolls to the bottom of the collection view. Also, I don't want to do multiple downloads, so we'll try to check if the system is already downloading something by using a boolean object is downloading. When we are fetching the JSON data and converting to NS dictionary, let's also get the next URL from the pagination key in the dictionary at the next URL key. Also, at the end of this method, I can specify that is downloading is no, since it's completed downloading at this point. Also, when view is loaded, I can specify that is downloading is no. Let's add the scrolling logic. Collection view is part of the scroll view, and it does call a method scroll view did scroll every time you scroll up and down or any scroll moments. Let's add this method, and inside this method I will check if the scroll views content offsets y coordinate is greater or equal to the entire scroll views content sizes height minus scroll views frames sizes height. If it is, that means user scroll to the bottom or more. That means let's download. First I will check if there is any download going on using the isDownload variable. If it's not, then I will call the function to download images with the next URL we fetched from JSON. When it starts downloading, inside the download images method, I will set is downloading to yes. Let's build this code. Build successful. There you go. It's running with no errors. Time for the test. Let's search for development. This was always working, but let's scroll down. Voila! There we see more images being downloaded and more to infinity. This is all that we needed. That's perfect. So I hope you learned or got some idea of how to build mobile and web applications using third-party APIs. Keep on coding and practicing. This was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this, I would recommend you to look for more advanced tutorials or in-depth training in this if this field is for you. Now, kind of try to pick your field: Android, iOS, or maybe web development. You can always change, but I would always recommend you to pick a field and then switch depending on how good you become in one. The concepts, if you saw, they all use the same concepts but different development environment. So I would say just try to focus on one, try to be a good at one, and after some practice, let's say 6 months to a year, you can always move to another environment. Happy coding.